My name is Ruth Allington. I'm from the United Kingdom. I am 60 years old and I have a first degree in geography and geology, which I completed in 1980, and then a master's in engineering geology, and later in my career I studied for an MBA, Master of Business Administration, and I have a number of professional qualifications which are relevant to my work. I became interested in a career in geology when I was at secondary school, and I've had moments of inspiration and encouragement throughout my career, and particularly in my early career and during my education. When I was at school in the 1970s, I studied geography, and I enjoyed geography very much indeed. I had two teachers, one teacher for what we call in the UK human geography, social geography if you like, physical, and one for physical geography. And I particularly like physical geography, and I also studied at senior level in school. I studied maths and physics with my physical geography. Geology was not an option at A level. That's what we call our highest school qualification in the UK. But there was a teacher a geography teacher. He wasn't one of my class teachers, but he was an enthusiastic amateur geologist. And he offered a group of us teaching to take a lower level qualification, in those days an O level. In modern terms that's called a GCSE in the UK. So that's a qualification taken at age 15, 16. In geology. So we had after school lessons and in the lunchtimes and that sort of thing. And I enjoyed that very, very much. And it started to make me think about geology. I'd already been thinking, what sort of geographical type of career I might go for. I thought about cartography, I thought about meteorology. I always came back to cartography because I've always loved maps, and I've always been involved in hiking and walking, so I love to be outdoors and in the mountains. And then one day he took us on a visit to the Polytechnic in Portsmouth, which is on the south coast of the UK. It's now called the University of Portsmouth. And we went to the engineering geology laboratory. And we were shown the laboratory where soil and rock samples are tested, or were in those days tested, and why the strength and properties of these materials was important in engineering projects. So we had a little presentation about that, and that made me think, I think that's what I'd like to do. So that was one of my moments of inspiration. And then I was, shortly after that, I was looking at options for a university degree. And I wanted very much to do geology, but I didn't feel confident enough really to go for pure geology programs, because I didn't feel I'd done enough geology. And so I looked at joint honours programs, and I chose geology and geography. And I went to King's College, London, University of London. And King's College is right on the bank of the Thames in the middle of London. In my interview, I went into the professor's office in geology. In geography, I had 2 interviews, but in geography, I went into the professor's office. And he said to me, Miss Allington, what did you notice about the geomorphology of the Strand? That's the street that King's College is on. I'm in a city. There's no geomorphology here, I think to myself. So, anyway, he helped me, and he told me, he said, oh, well, you know, he got me eventually to agree with him that we were on a river terrace. So the Thames has cut through the gravel accretion in the very wide valley of the River Thames, and there's a river terrace, and all of the streets that go down to the Thames around King's College go very steeply down to the water's edge. So there was another moment of inspiration. Even cities have geomorphology and geology. The ground doesn't lose its shape because you're in an urban environment. I spent 3 years at King's College, and I was very lucky because as a joint honours student I could mix and match with courses. And I took all the courses which were physical geography and all those in geology which I'd call physical geology. So I got a very good foundation in mapping and structural geology and processes, surface processes and subsurface processes. Not so much in mineralogy, crystallography, those sorts of topics. Not that they didn't interest me, but I was more interested in the relation between the surface and the subsurface. And I had an inspirational tutor, a man called Dennis Brunston, who is an excellent geomorphologist, but he would, at that time, he was developing into an engineering geomorphologist and working with civil engineers particularly in the in using geomorphology to understand mass movements and subsurface processes. So undertaking geomorphological mapping, terrain evaluation mapping. He and others, engineering geologists, this tribe I eventually joined, had been very influenced by the Aberfan disaster, which was a colliery spoil heap collapse in 1966 in Wales, where many children, over 100 children, small children, were killed as the result of this collapse of a colliery spoil heap which engulfed their school. And that really kick-started this practical application of geology and engineering working together to solve these sorts of problems. So he was an inspiration to bring together my two strands, my geomorphology and my geology, into a crystallized interest in engineering geology. So I'd had the seed sown while I was at school, and then I thought, yes, and then I'd like to do a master's. And I was extremely lucky because he introduced me to the person who offered me a job as a graduate, and I left that firm in August last year, so 6 months ago, after 38 years. So I was with the same firm for 38 years as an engineering geologist. My profession, through this sequence I've described of inspiration and lucky accident, is as an engineering geologist. But my sector is within mining and quarrying, primarily for the extraction of construction raw materials. Initially in my career I worked quite a lot in open cast coal mining, But later on, most of my work in designing designing quarries, what shape they need to be, how deep they are, how much we can get out of the ground, how do we process it, all of those sorts of things. What's the resource, what's the reserve? That has mostly been applied in construction raw materials, and by that I mean loose aggregates, sand and gravel, which may be of glacial origin or from rivers. Hard rock aggregates, so crushed hard rock that we have to blast to get out of the ground. The raw materials we need for manufacture of cement, so that would be limestone and shale or clay, typically, and the chemistry then of those materials and how they're combined together. Special clays for making bricks, and also building stones that are, if you go down any city street, almost anywhere in the world, you'll see quite a lot of beautiful rock in polished slabs on the fronts of buildings. You might see beautiful rock in the floor of buildings, and that is extracted from the ground in blocks. And there, the size and shape of the block is important, and the aesthetics, the colour and the texture, and so on. So that's what I mean by construction materials. And it's not a very sexy sector in some ways, but it's the sector that produces the ordinary things that we take for granted, like the plaster on the walls in this room, like what we call filler, the particles we put into paint to make it thick, like the covering we use on paper, so that when we put ink on paper, it doesn't, it's not like blotting paper. And although the cost per tonne of buying sand or aggregate or crushed limestone for paint thickener is infinitesimally smaller than the price you'd pay for an ounce of gold, the total value of those mineral products, those raw materials traded in the world is infinitesimally larger than the value of metalliferous minerals. I would encourage them to consider it because of the huge amount of choice there is. Well, first because geoscience matters so much. It's really fundamental to the concerns of the moment, to the concerns of the world. It's fundamental to sustainable development. It's fundamental to understanding and responding to climate change. It's fundamental to developing society. And then because of the huge range of opportunities and flavours, if you like, of geology that exist, there's a lot of choice. But the essence of geology is a different way of looking at the world that the general population doesn't necessarily have. We look at the world and we visualize and conceptualize the rocks under our feet and the interior of the earth in special ways that we learn. We learn this way of thinking. So even if young women don't use their geology in their profession, I would say that anybody who has studied geology will have some life-enhancing skills that they will have learnt through studying geology. Now, what do I mean by that? The study of geology is based on management of uncertainty. We can't actually see what's under our feet. We can only sample what's under our feet, and we can extrapolate. We can sometimes see the rocks sticking out, and we can drill a borehole, but we have to work out what's going on between what we can see in a rock face and what we can find in our borehole. And so we learn very much to feel comfortable with ambiguity and risk evaluation. You know, what's the level of uncertainty? How can we express that? What does it mean? How much more information do we need? And I found that way of thinking, and also thinking in 3 and 4 dimensions, the 4th dimension being time, to be helpful in making me a more creative thinker generally.